Welcome to Pure Signal, where we digest the biggest developments in technology, AI, and beyond, bringing you strategy-focused insights to position your business, yes, your business, for an uncertain future. I'm Ryan Medellin, a manager in our digital strategy and delivery practice, joined as always with Jake Carter, our Chief Innovation Officer, and our North American CEO, Kevin Erickson. And a little behind the curtain for you all here. On our run sheet, I'm seeing go to Jake.
Go to Jake
to
first.
Start us off.
Yeah,
oh, no.
Jake never wants to be first, and so we're going to let him talk about himself right now. Or how you're doing.
Oh, how I'm doing.
How
I'm
doing?
like,
Not yourself.
Talk about myself?
Yeah, how's life?
How's your life? How's your week been?
The week was good. Kevin knows this, but Ryan, I was in Philly this week with one of our other partners. We have a potential chance to work with a pharma company, and so we spent some time with them this week. That was a lot of fun. Kevin, you will appreciate this because you know me. So I chose to stay at the inn at Swarthmore because I was like, hey, if I'm going out here, I've got to drive by this anyways. I have this weird love of college campuses. Like, I love the architecture. I love the vibe. So I went and stayed on campus. That was my highlight.
Fun for you. I did know you were in Philly because I was playing in a particular golf tournament on Monday with a couple of partners that were battling for your time.
Yes.
And I got to see that play out in real time. So I'm glad you had a good time in Philly.
Well, how was the golf tournament?
It was fine. We had fun. We played well, supported a good cause. You know, anytime that you can spend a Monday out on the golf course. And it was Texas in the middle of September, 12 o'clock shotgun start, which has the potential to be terrible. It was perfect. It was 80 degrees, sunny, beautiful day.
Nice.
Did you beat the partners or the clients, or who won? What was your strategy within the strategy of the golf tournament?
I was the short game guy.
The short game
Ever since
guy.
I had kids, my tee box game has just completely fallen off. So fortunately, we had a couple of our sharpshooters in my foursome, so I was able to help with the in-between stuff. But we had two teams representing Credera, and one of the teams did really well. The other one not so well. I'll let you take a guess which one I was on. But, you know, it was a great time.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, glad to hear Philly went well. I, too, love college campuses. It was interesting when I went back to my college campus after many years off and the development of the electric scooter, the one with the app that you could just...
Changes the game.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that you could... We had to take the bus all around campus because I went to Texas Tech, which is a larger school, flat but large. And when I went back, everybody was on those scooters, and I'm like, oh, man, I would have thrived. Right. If I was there when this was happening.
They probably rake in the money on college campuses with those scooters.
100%.
You think about Philly. I had a client where I spent some time in Philadelphia, right on Penn's campus. So it wasn't, Penn was not the client, but it was based on their campus. And the hotel we would stay at, I'd overlook the Penn relays every single day. So there you go.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Walk the 32 blocks down to where all the historical stuff was. So
you do quite a bit of traveling.
I do.
And you were traveling this week.
Yeah, I will. I mean, before I give a little bit of that, I just wanted to kind of talk real to our listeners. You know, so obviously Ryan and Jake have been on the last couple episodes, and we're super excited for that. So I just wanted to kind of just formally let you in on something what you already all know, that Ryan and Jake are going to be part of our full-time crew here at Pure Signal. So excited for both of them to join and bring their unique gift and abilities and insights to what we're doing. So thank you for that. Thank you for joining our journey. And yeah, as for me, I had a really fun week. I spent the first couple of days with our LA team, and I was out there, and it's two things. One, I accomplished something that is not that hard to do, but I had not done before, which is I had my first Waymo ride. And so
nice.
I had been waiting to do that in a market that they serve and hadn't had a chance. And so that was pretty interesting. And from a standpoint of like what was interesting about it is how normal it was. I'd been thinking about it for actually a couple of years, especially where I'd seen them in a couple markets where I'd been, and I didn't know what I would expect. Would you be nervous? Would you work through that? And I think the most interesting element for me is that it was how anything it was. I mean, literally I sat in, I was on a call, I normally am, and oftentimes when I'm in a ride share, and literally it was 45 minutes, 10 miles in LA bumper traffic, and never once thought about it. And what was interesting, it goes to my second element. I had a chance this week to be a fly on the wall at the All In Summit, which was phenomenal. And at that, it was interesting. Uber's CEO spoke. He was one of the speakers, and we were talking a ton about autonomous vehicles. There was a robotaxi that was Tesla was out trying to get people to sign up for their service. But what was interesting from his perspective, in Austin and in Atlanta, you can get a Waymo through Uber, which I've actually tried to do when I was in Atlanta earlier this summer, but the wait times were not going to get me to the airport. But his interesting element, he's seen very high adoption of Waymo in the Uber, and it was they were asking him why, and he was talking about one, I think the novelty of it, the privacy of it, but actually the car experience itself is just nicer. Obviously, they're Jaguars, it's clean, it's all those different elements. I mean, I think your Uber experience, at least in my world, can still be very much hit or miss in terms of what is the actual quality of the car experience in terms of just cleanliness and comfort. But it was great. And I can't wait for it to be in our home market. And did talk to the Tesla guys. Dallas is on the robotaxi roadmap, so that might be interesting. But I am eager to have, not only for myself, but for my family. I'm envisioning less running our kids around in conflicts where we can stuff them into an autonomous car.
I like it.
Yeah.
No worries.
I want to talk about the All-In Summit before we go on. How did you swing that invite?
I was a +1, and so which I was very gracious of one of our colleagues. So Vincent invited me to go out with him, and I wasn't familiar of all but you go once, and then you go a second year, you're able to bring a +1. So I hope I can go again and do that. But it was a phenomenal learning. So one thing, we talk about here, we've got this concept of training time off. And so I was able to use that for a couple days to do that and just have a chance to think and to listen, and, a couple different themes. For those of you who aren't familiar with All In or the Summit, it's obviously it's a who's who list of across tech and crypto and politics and academics. And one of my favorite discussions, Jake, was the chancellor of Berkeley and the president of Dartmouth being beat up for everything you can imagine that they were being beat up with. It was just really fascinating to hear them talk about censorship and what's going on campuses and working through that. But I think lots of things to unpack, and happy to share. Took about 15 pages of notes and have all access to a lot of it. But I think there was two big themes that I took away that were, one is just the moment of time that we're in, and just with things in the West, the things that are going on with the Middle East, things that are going on with just our college campuses, all this, just challenges that are associated with our time, and having that be a backdrop. And then, obviously the audience of All In, the hosts themselves are entrepreneurs, they're tech, they're driven. David Sachs is obviously impacting a lot of cryptocurrency policy within the U.S. right now, but was this sense of optimism, this sense of what's before us with AI and technology, and just really not only just sense of optimism what we're doing, which maybe you would expect from a founder-driven type organization, or at least a conference, but really also an increased discharged for the group to be able to speak and to speak out, and this this pro kind of business, pro kind of growth, this belief in a bigger pie type scenario. So really cool stuff for what's going on in terms of just that. So I just left with very encouraged and thankful and blessed that I had the time to do that and really step away from our little world for a couple days, and lots of learning to do, lots more thinking. I know, Jake, you and I are spending some time this week. We can share a few more insights on that, and hope to bring that into other things that we do. And then specifically the tie-in for our day job, I just left with, I've already been really kind of very excited about, as we go from AI-driven velocity enhancements, we're seeing that across everything, that a lot of clients we're seeing that within our business, and really shifting to what is the organization going to look like with an AI-focused start. So think about different processes, different organization. So you think about this world of where you're going, and it was just very interesting to see different businesses that, they're either on an AI journey, and so they're going to have to retrofit what they're doing, or there was a fascinating company out of Saudi Arabia that is been formed the last couple of years, highly funded. They're doing very cool things from acting a little bit like hyperscale in the Middle East, also building large language models from an Arabic learning perspective. So very fascinating. But they've built their company with an AI first mindset, and so they actually they were trying to share some of their operating and thinking, which is just radically different, which I think for me, I'm thinking a lot about that in my day job here at what we're doing, but also increasingly talking to our clients about how you reorganize and what you would think and really what will change. And it's not simply velocity changes anymore. It's like, literally, will this department need to exist anymore?
That's right.
And I think that's the next 2 to 3 years. So came back from like even more motivated that we got to help our clients and ourselves think about these different changes.
Yeah, I think too, if you look at all of the episodes that we've had in Pure Signal, the couple that I've been a part of, and Jake and with Jason and Vincent leading up to this, it was all really hypothetical. We're thinking about what could happen next year in 2026, but it's October when this episode comes out, and this is the make or break time for a lot of businesses as they go into annual planning for 2026. So, we pontificated upon it. We've thrown out hypotheticals on what it could look like, but we're actually about to start seeing where companies are going to put their dollars and where they're going to make some big changes ahead of the new year, where it's really kind of going to be the first full year of like, we have these tools now. We have an understanding of how we can, change our processes and the ways we think. And I think that's where we really want to dive into today is what does that look like and what are we going to see from these companies? And I think a lot of your takeaways can kind of help shape your thinking on that.
Well, I'm actually gonna pivot to talk about this. We can talk about the basic, blocking and tackling of planning. I mean, for those of you that are on a calendar year, this is part of the rite of fall, and we'll get into that in a second. But actually, Jake, I want to kick it to you first to think about. Come from a innovation, design thinking, infused AI. How do you start to think about what you would think about normally from an initiative perspective? Bring some of that thinking elements of that into an annual planning process, which if we're probably honest, most companies start with take over last year's plans, refresh the templates in the PowerPoint and the Excel, and go from there.
Thank you for the tee up. I actually have an opinion on this, and it is straight from the innovation playbook. So my advice for companies going through annual planning, thinking about how does AI fit that this year, is if you're thinking about how do I budget for AI, I would argue the old tried and true 70-20-10 rule comes into play. So think about, what is the pool of funding that you're willing to put behind AI for the year? And we can talk about, how much should that be, what percentage of revenue or anything like that. But for whatever that amount is, then I would think about, well, I want about 70% of that to be focused on what is working in AI for us, and how do I scale that across the enterprise? That's where I'm going to put the bulk of my money. Then I would put my next 20% around, okay, how do I then not just think about how do I expand that across the organization, but how do I build on that? This is the old, if I think about my core adjacent transformational innovations, this is the adjacencies. And then I still want to reserve, and I think this is really important, as much as enterprises are trying to move beyond pilot world, you still have to have the exploration. And I would still put 10% of my funds and protect it around the exploration. Now, the other thing that I would say that I think is really important that gets missed is I want to do all of that. I also have to be very careful right now to budget for the inputs for AI. And what I mean by that is if I just put my money around, what are the initiatives that I'm going to go pursue with AI, I'll never get where I want to be. So what I would be thinking about there is I need to be reserving funds for compute costs. I need to be, if I'm running data centers, reserving funds for just the increased power usage on the data centers and the drum that we beat over and over. I need to be reserving funds for how am I ingesting and normalizing the data that's going to go feed into all of these AI things that I'm driving.
I think it's interesting, thinking about from the budget, maybe go a little deeper around. Maybe this is not, just think about it let's think about it from context. How do you what if you would break up the traditional annual planning activities into different use cases and actually think about that from, an AI lens, a use case or innovation. And those don't have to be they could be mutually, they're separate. They could be all over the same, but I'm kind of curious of just how do we kind of eat our own dog food. I mean, one thing I've been talking about I've been working or talking to one of our clients about just this idea of, using kind of classical design sprint teams in an AI-centered world where you roll out Tiger teams, whatever language you might use, but really combining Tiger team and AI with thinking with design thinking in very quick prototype rollouts, but breaking it up by either a functional area or breaking it up in a function. But think about classical planning in terms of budgeting, estimating, strategic priorities, issues, risk management, competitive landscape. I mean, all those normal kind of components that go into this process. How would you start to use that from an use case perspective potentially?
I mean, the big thing that jumps out to me, my gut reaction is to fire for effect. should we be doing annual planning?
I love it. Yeah, I would give me some time back in my life. That is for sure.
Well, what I mean by that is, yes, we've got to go cast the vision of, hey, here's what the budgets are going to be. Here's what the plan's going to be. But from an initiative standpoint, from a use case standpoint, like looking at a 12-month horizon is probably not realistic right now.
Yeah.
So when you say use cases, how do we think about the use cases? That's the immediate thing that goes through my mind. Now, what you could still have, and what we probably will still have, is we've got the strategic themes.
Yeah.
But how do we activate those strategic themes? I think looks different right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and if anyone in my chain of command is listening to this, please don't judge me as I start to say this. But like, I have to be honest. When I saw, we kicked off the process, and we have stuff that we're doing within our business unit, and obviously we roll up to others. And I was frankly a bit disappointed that it was literally the same damn thing from the previous years. And it's and just as you run to innovation, I always run to my mama, which is really around the strategy. So you're going to create hundreds of pages of stuff, right, when I'm like, all that really matters is the 2-pager on what is the key strategic initiatives, how you're going to grow. Because as in most annual planning or planning activities, you put a plan, you do your best case, but you're gonna get the classic line, right? You never survive the first punch of whatever you're doing, and so that's gonna your plan's gonna evolve. And so I also find, like, I want to have a direction, but I don't want to spend so much time that we've become to the point to where I think the risk is that we often will spend time, which I think is on the insignificant, which is in terms of just what it looks like, what do you think you're going to hire, how are you going to grow, when it's like, kind of pick at all kinds of pop culture today, Pinky in the Brain. What are we going to do every year? We're going to grow as fast as we possibly can. It's like every year that's the goal. And then how are we going to do it? What are we going to react to? How are we going to think about that? But what I think about right now more than most years is, I'm actually, someone's coming out of this week, I'm a bit more optimistic. I actually feel like I was expressing this earlier this week to some people that I think we're in from an overall macro business climate, even with the crazy events of this week that's happening from a cultural perspective, I feel like we're in a better spot than we were a year ago. We're post the election. We kind of know what's going on. I feel like, at least in our business, most of our clients that we're seeing growth in have a runway that's going to propel that. And so I'm actually pretty bullish about what we're seeing there. So which then gives us a chance to reinvest in the growth of the business, which is really going to be around the AI themes and how do we accelerate that? Again, how do we, both from a two-front perspective, how do we help our clients really accelerate their use of AI, thinking about it differently, again, moving from adoption and really kind of velocity enhancement to more strategic thinking, radical change. And how do we see that for ourselves? What is the investments in that? Obviously you talked about compute, and then how to, from a workforce perspective, Ryan, I'd be actually interested in your perspective now, like, someone who's, you spend your day job as serving our clients, working through the tools, like how do I want to make sure we have not only do our employees and how we serve our clients have all the access to tools and thinking and methodologies, but also that we're really operating in an AI first world, and how do we incorporate that into what we need to do from a planning perspective?
Yeah, for me, I think it's the transformation's not going to happen overnight, right? And I've been part of businesses before, even when AI wasn't a thing, but like you had these leaders that had these big visions, which I love. But then it seemed like the middle was kind of left to fend for itself while the leaders were thinking about these big changes and only these big changes, and not finding that support for the middle that we still need to get to those big changes. And so I think, to me, one of the things that's going to be most important from like a leadership perspective of what, us that are in the weeds with the clients, all that every day want to see is that I want big thinking. I want these big ideas. I want the access to these tools. But then there's also this balance of like, that's where we're going. Here's how we get there in between, and then really being able to put some support in the in between. Because I think, we talked a couple of episodes ago about how a lot of these initiatives are failing, and the difference between externally and internally was massive. The external ones were doing a lot better. The ones that we were, that are serving client side versus the ones that are being brought in internally. And I think one of the things that could speak to that is that there may not have been enough support or ideas around the change in process before that big change can occur. So to me, that's where like I really see the success coming from a leadership down to the lower levels within a company, is just being able to say, we are going to give you the big ideas and the tools to achieve these big ideas and be able to expedite processes and do all those things. But in the meantime, here's how we're going to support you to get there.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, really good, and maybe that's a good segue into kind of, okay, well, now maybe more specifics. How do we start to think about not so much the actual annual planning process, but maybe this now gets into either the initiatives or the employee side or the cost side. And I think the adoption element of like in a couple different formats, so we often use the Tiger Team construct or the design thinking. I think those are going to, Jake, I believe those are going to continue to come more together where they're going to be one and the same. Yep. But really, how do you start to deploy those, not now simply as a front end of an innovation cycle, but no, we're going to operationalize this. So, really in charge a group of people or function that your job is to go fully funded to go really attack every single system and process that we have that could be done in a different way. And then how do we make that, just completely embed that into our culture then in ways that hasn't been done before. So, and I'm saying that for ourselves. I would encourage different leaders, whether it be in a department or companies, for you to think about how do you actually really look at one of the best ways you're going to serve your clients or grow your business is going to by really changing your business. And how do you do that internally and externally? I think going back, Ryan, where you're talking about what is it going to take for our team to not only have training, adoption, but really change the expectations. I think that's the one thing that's been different. I think that I'm sure many companies have been talking now about AI for a number of years. It's, we're going on really 3 years from the current kind of agentic AI perspective versus just classical, data, large language model automation and elements of that. But like how it's no longer, at least for our employees, it's like you have to do it to do your job, and some of that's going to be just simply how we assess our talent. How do you see people get done? I mean, our clients are clearly expecting that from us, but also from our standpoint of leaders in our business, like we need to train, but frankly, if people don't adopt or they're not using, I think there's a point in time where that they can't be an employee anymore. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but and lots of grace in how we do that, but we have to bring that in, and then I think the willingness to look at it from the investments that we make, and I think this is probably maybe the hardest ones for many companies, is that are you willing to invest in the time, the technology required, the support if you need outside support for that? Are you willing to change? Are you willing to stop what you were doing? Think about how many of our clients have, we're going to do this thing and we're going to have this system upgrade, or we have this pass that we're going to do. And, it's like you've got these multi-year things, and are you having the courage to actually pause and rethink? And I think that's what I would encourage not our clients to do, but for us to do, which I think again leads Jake naturally into the kind of your discipline.
Well, it is a balance too, right? And Jake, I think you'll probably go this way as well, because you have to move fast in this world we're in now, right? If you're not fast, you're behind, and you're behind by a lot because it's changing so quickly all the time. And so the words you say there, pause and rethink, that's super important. And I think that's also where, when we talk about investments companies need to make in 2026, invest in your people. Find the people that, maybe there's jobs that can be automated and whatnot, but you're still going to have those people that as a leader, you can lean on to then champion the efforts that are happening within the smaller parts of the organization to help bring those people along so that they don't fall behind. And we have to look at that person and say, well, maybe, you're not moving fast enough. So that's what I would say.
Well, let me react to that. I think, man, we could spend a whole episode on what you just brought up, Kevin, but specifically riffing on what you're saying around investing in the people. I mean, this is easy to overlook, but really important right now is the upskilling notion you made the comment, Kevin, of you upskill or you're kind of done, but getting your employees upskilled when it comes to AI and how to use AI, how to be effective with AI is really important right now. And I think then you pair that with some selective hiring. You don't have to go replace your entire workforce, but you do need the injection of fresh thinking, especially as it comes to AI.
Yeah. This is kind of fun, I think one of the things else that's going to be interesting now, keeping the theme back to, a couple thoughts. I'm going to go a second, go back to annual planning. So I think it's with some tactical thinking, but one of the things else that's kind of just a reoccurring theme, and I've said it before here and just encouraged throughout the week, and even how it goes into this, is that we need to the value of curiosity. And we're most of our day job is consulting, so that's part of what we do. The learning, I think that's what makes a great consultant and really a great helping and support our clients. But I am And we know we've been in some of my role. We've been looking at different things, core values, whatever else. And it's really important to our firm. But like the curiosity is the one that keeps on bubbling up for us, and then that leads to creativity. Then that leads into change, and then it leads into how do you as an organization really encourage change and support that. And I think that's where often again the annual planning process, like it's why do people dread it, is because it's repetitive, it's boring, it's actually for the most part not very critical thinking. You're not actually, for most times, you're not actually encouraged to be bold. You're encouraged, and so all these different things. I'm sure many people can have their variant of that, and I think that this is a time to be bold. And now whether maybe you don't necessarily, hey, I'm gonna, we're on a X% growth rate, and I'm gonna assume a 4X% growth rate. I mean, I don't know if I'd be bold there, but where you invest, how you work through that, how things to change, and I think that takes the leadership to be able to work and do that. And the other thing else that I think is interesting is as pace of everything accelerates. Let's just buy into this instinct for a second that the classical engineering world, already agile methodologies and that thinking for the last 20 years have accelerated elements of that. AI is going to make that even further. My real question is potentially as a strategist now, not even as an executive, is what's the value of planning? When how far out can you really suggest what's going to look like? Could you really understand what your workforce is going to be? Or is it really around, we have to have really on-demand elements of that? We have expectations, you have growth, you got profitability, you've got whatever, we want to take this market share. Those are all going to remain. So you have those objectives, that's strategy, but then how you do it, I think, needs to be more flexible. Where you're going to invest in human capital versus compute or other elements, where you're going to actually think about your strategic partner landscape differently. There's a lot of different ways, and I think that, but it's become so. As the machine, particularly in our large organizations, start to work through this, well, I start with this, then I do this, and how many people, and how much money, and yada, 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 yada. And I'm like an executive, I want to be like, I want the cheat codes just to get to the end. And I think that AI actually provides some of that, and we have an opportunity to literally use this moment to think differently. And I think it's actually, I'm super excited about where this could go, while I know that I'm going to still have to play the game a little bit with the materials. But
I want to riff on that, if I may.
Yeah.
In two ways. One, my takeaway from what you just said is that I should be bold when it comes to my budget submission for the year. That's what you were saying, right?
I'm absolutely saying that, and then I'll tell you no.
boldly.
I'll boldly say no. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Bold with bold.
No, but
With
in
conviction, I'll say no.
Riffing on what you were saying about the curiosity and the creativity, which I completely agree with. One of the things that I was thinking about this week is, if you follow that logically, does that change how we start thinking about how we resource initiatives?
Yes.
So here's what I mean by that. Instead of thinking about initiatives as, hey, we have a project. For example, we have a system we need to go roll out, and we're going to resource this as a project. It's got a finite start and an end. Should we start thinking differently and think about it as, hey, I, as an executive, I have a metric that I want to move. And what I'm going to do, this is product land, is I'm going to go build a group of people that are going to own that metric or that objective or that even business function, pair them with the AI behind the scenes, but let them give them the durability and the resources to go get creative and, hey, you guys go work on this and figure out how to drive this. But, I think that introduces a little bit of the flexibility that you were talking about, and works if you're bringing in the curiosity and the creativity.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, I think, and maybe building off of that too, this is another thing I've been wrestling with a little bit, is just how we blend, the classical engineering, again, agile method, go fast, work through that, with how that fit into kind of this AI-driven design sprint process world. And what's intriguing to me is just around the amount of time we're going to spend testing and prototyping and working through that. And I think that how we do that within the simulation worlds, I think we'll do more of that. And then you'll have very quick turn into production. It's going to be where, at least from a software engineering perspective, I know that I'm probably least skilled in this call to have that discussion, but take that same construct into planning, which is really around, I want to have structures. I want to have key themes that tells us here's the roadmap of where we're going, but allow for moments to be able to have chance to be define the specificity when you're in it. Let the different inputs come. So actually, from a planning perspective, being okay that it's actually all right if it's a little bit more hazy, but you know where you're going. Again, I was talking to a client recently where we were discussing some of these themes, and you eventually get down to, well, what's the KPIs, what's the ROI, what's working through, right? You have to, and not even from a contractual relationship, but just even from like them as supporting their business. And my suggestion to them was, hey, I don't necessarily know the roadmap to get there, but I think we can say where we're trying to go. And then we put stage gates in the roadmap that allows us to continue to assess and pivot, which I think is just an actually next evolution of really where companies and roads and have gone, again, from, think classic agile. And so it's really exciting, but then it comes back to, where does it matter? Like in my role now, it's the courage. It's the courage of an executive to say, hey, we're going to have where we're going, but have it be more hazy. It's the courage to know that not all the details are going to be there. It's going to be courage to say, I may not have to have an annual plan that says I'm going to hire X number of people for this, and just kind of stay locked into that. It's the courage now from a technology perspective of, I again lean a bit more towards process and strategy in org, so that's where my bias is. But I actually think when I look at this next year of landscape, for most companies, your investments in AI are going to likely be building off of what other people are doing from a technology perspective into this process of adoption. There'll be some companies, obviously, that are going to be buying hardware and doing their own riffs off of models and kind of working through that. If Jason were here and here, he would obviously have a strong perspective on that. But I think that's going to be like from a company perspective, where is your competitive advantage? For many, it's going to be what is ultimately the good and service that you're offering your clients. And I think you're going to see lots of gains on the people and process side, structure side. And then for companies where it is going to be important that you actually have more control of, on the tech side, I think it's the still classical, you got to have the data. Anything we're going to do, you have to have good data. That's still the fundamental elements of that. How you access that data, how you get to ingest it, how do you, use it. I think that's going to be interesting. I think there'll be some investments in there. For some of our, some companies that have, they need to take and build off their own kind of use case and take their own learning and inference models. I think that might be interesting too, but it's really going to be really around, I think, how you know where you want to play. And I think, again, for a lot of our clients, I think it's actually cheaper to do the human capital side than it is to do the hardware and model side. So, but it's really, and so if I'm a CIO, you're thinking about that from, well, how do I continue to make sure that we have access to the data that we need and really continue to make that easy? How do we make it easy for our employees and our departments to use AI-driven tools? How do we continue to understand what is safe? And, we've talked about this before on this theme of like, safe and security is very, very important, but there's also a risk to going too slow because you're afraid of some of those elements. And so obviously that's why people are in those roles and have to wrestle through that. Not giving financial or legal or technical advice when I say that, but I do encourage, I think the fault for many companies will be to be more cautious. And I think there's the opportunity cost of caution at this particular moment is maybe greater than the risk of doing something that feels a little reckless. And I think that's actually, for me, I get excited about that because I want to be pushing change. But I know that different organizations are going to have a different perspective on that.
Yeah. In my mind, what I'm hearing after you say that, and I'm going back to when you were talking about, so what you're asking me is to be bold in my planning. And then you jokingly and kind of not jokingly saying, I'm going to tell you no, but I'll do it boldly. To me, my mind goes back to the classic wooden box in an old school office of ideas, the idea box that every month you pull out and you see what ideas does everybody have. So I'd ask you, Kevin and Jake, I'd love for you to chime in on this as well, as it takes courage from the leader of a company standpoint to challenge the status quo, but do it in a way that you're still doing what needs to get done in order for that process. But how do we do that while also still encouraging the other leaders at the company to be bold, knowing that, hey, it may not happen now, but it doesn't mean I'm not putting it in my idea box to build a case for change the next time around, or even if it comes up at some point during the year.
Yeah. This is a lot of different threads we can go on this one too. And some of this comes back to what's the game you're playing. And what I mean by that is, in larger organizations, playing the game of the political structure of the organization is how many people do success. And there's nothing wrong with that, and through that you can have personal objectives, you can have corporate objectives, and all working through that. oftentimes bold in that area and that kind of environment could be actually not seen as a positive thing. And so I think it really comes back to my charge is that we all have to choose what we want to do, who we want to be, what we want to operate in. And because you have, you have a different, I think, a moment in time where organizations changes are going to happen at a more rapid pace, and the impact of not changing is going to be seen in the winners and losers, that I would encourage our listeners to be bold and not like in a silly way, but like, frankly, push the envelope now. And if you're in an organization where potentially you can't, like, maybe you go someplace else. I mean that in a really kind way, easier said than done. But I think this is the moment, I think, to really push development. We're not talking about, hey, I'm going to go and from a technical perspective and say, I think we should get off on-prem and go to cloud, right? I mean, that's a tactic that, you had to work through that, but that wasn't bold. That was just, you have people at different stages. But I think now it's really, you can work through that. Now, the thing that's interesting to me is don't be reckless in your boldness. I think you still tie it back to company objectives, ROI, and sales. This is one of my critiques I've always felt about Agile, is that it's like it celebrates the journey without knowing where the destination is. And I don't even know how to measure when I got there. So I actually think still having what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to do that, why you're trying to make that. And then, but I think that we're in a moment where there's enough adoption of that. I think that there's openness. I'm going to bring up something in that I want to come back to because it's been intriguing and maybe it's somewhat personal for based on my age. There was a study a couple of weeks ago that came out talking about that baby boomers were hanging on to their CEO slots and the Gen Zers or Gen Xers were kind of being passed over. And it was, so you're either like a lot of CEOs from lower organizations are in their 60s or older, or they're going down and they're doing people in the 30s and the 40s. And yeah, as someone who's in that inner gap, like it's a little bit interesting question of the why. I think part of the why, and this is something for us to unpack in a different time, is if you're in that older age group and you're building legacy, you really have nothing to lose, right? And so actually doing something different, many of those executives are already there. So they're looking at a bit of a free roll, so to speak, of like they're already at the end game of time. And if you're younger, you're probably more comfortable, you're eager, you're working through this. If you're in this stage, say I'll just roughly you're 50 plus or minus, I think you've played probably a relatively cautious game for most of your career. You've played the political angles. You've worked through these different elements. You've worked very hard to get into here. You survived the pandemic, which was a whole different cluster of how it meant to be in organizational structures. And I think that actually probably one of the reasons why they're being passed over is because they're not being bold and they're not being creative and they're not driving. And you've got even like coming and looking at the where I was at this week and listening to all these executives, it was interesting to see who are the sages that did it before, kind of really built off the internet, and then who are the ones that are emerging that are really coming up off of AI and crypto and blockchain and those elements, and who's bridging the gap in between. And so as we kick off annual planning season, there's a lot of people that are in that gap in between doing annual planning, and I think it's really, this is do you want to be in your role and be there because you're playing, you're doing what you've always done or what you're being told to do, or do you actually want to lead more aggressively and courageously? And I think everyone's got to make that choice, and you have to understand the risk of doing that. But my encouragement is have fun and learn and go after it.
Be curious.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Jake, from your perspective of, somebody who is tasked with being bold, I mean, innovation, that's a big word, right? How do you find that balance of, hey, what's going to get called me a crazy person, or what's going to lead me to creating the next big thing?
Well, funny enough, Kevin actually took exactly what I was going to say, which is be bold, don't be reckless. But no, I mean, in truth, I'll go all the way back to where we started. There is an adage in innovation. There's a couple that come into play. One is that, the ideas are easy, not to downplay what we do, but getting to the ideas is the easy part. Getting from the idea to reality is the hard part. So that's one thing. But then I go back to the portfolio we talked about at the beginning. To me, part of being bold but not being reckless is thinking strategically about, okay, where am I going to place the bets? Where am I going to push the bounds? But also, how am I going to do it in the right balance so that I'm still, protecting the core?
Any other final thoughts, gentlemen, before we get out of here for this one?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about for final thoughts, but I'm gonna go back to each of you. Like, would be one or two or three takeaways for you to think about it. If we think about, again, the theme of this is around boldness, creativity in the context of annual planning, using tools today that are changing. So, like, what are some practical applications? Yeah. I know what you kind of were asking, but I'm gonna kick it back to you so I can think about it. But we'll start with Jake, and then we'll work around the table here, the couches here.
That's where I was getting at with final take.
I know you're going,
thoughts.
but I'm gonna.
Let's tell the people what they can do.
What they can do, they can listen to more episodes.
Exactly, right? Find out what to do next on next episode. Pure Signal.
That's the takeaway. Keep listening.
Keep listening.
Be bold in your listening.
Yeah. Got to give a little bit each episode to unlock all the puzzle.
No, I mean, to me, the themes, we started with the topic of annual planning. To me, the very high level takeaways are, one, if you're not thinking about how does AI fit in your annual planning, this is the year where you should be doing it. And then I think, two, if I riff on that, there are these adjacencies off of AI and annual planning that you can't miss. One of those is the people. We spent some time thinking about how do the people fit that equation. And from an annual planning perspective, there's costs associated with that. And the other is the, again, what I would call the inputs into the AI. So the things like the compute, like the data, all of the costs that are not the AI directly, but that are associated with it. If we're sticking with, hey, what do I do with annual planning this year? That's where my brain goes. The other big takeaway is then, where we were riffing on, do you do this whole annual planning process differently this year? And to me, I think the answer is yes, but obviously I have innovation colored lenses.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's super interesting with where I am because like I had mentioned to you all, I've been at companies where the leaders dreamt big, but they did it in a reckless fashion. And I'll tell y'all right now, and y'all know this, people are smart. The people inside of a company are smart, and they can tell when things aren't going to pan out, or at least they don't see that vision. And I will say, when I've seen leaders make big dreams, I could see the vision when I knew it was true. And so my advice and my take would be, and I think it's the theme, right? Dream big, but do it responsibly, because I think people can pick up on that. And if you do that in an effective way, the people behind you will support you and will go to battle for you in helping achieve those goals, because we all want to do that same thing too. We want to be a part of something big. We want to be part of something that gets us excited to go into the office and collaborate and do those types of things. So for me, in my chair here, to me, it's just, I want leaders that dream big, but I also want to be able to see that vision and see how I can help support get there.
Yeah. The couple takeaways for me, and most of this, at least from my discussion, is a bit biased towards an organization that has probably a little bit larger in terms of some of the more structured ways that you do this. But I would encourage our listeners to really focus more on the strategy. So think about the overall time you're going to spend on that. Put a ton of thinking about the strategy of where you want to go, what the outcomes that you want to have, and let that start to dictate where you're at versus the mechanics of the buildup of classical elements of that. That will come. In fact, I think you should be using AI-driven tools to be able to accelerate that. I've actually done most of our annual planning and most of the thinking. I've done walking and communicating, and then the ability to take that from a transcription and be able to formulate that into thinking and slides and strategy has been exceptionally fast, and which has been intriguing. That I can actually use that, and we can get inputs from different sources. So I think that's been a really simple thing that I've used. But I would also, I'm going to build off of two. I would think, depending on your organization, typically you're thinking about, how do I bring something to the market? How do I think about my customer? Those are really important themes. But it's possible that this year you should focus a bit more internally and really thinking about the risk of not changing fast internally. What are those investments? What are those expectations? Where do you have to invest in human capital? What should you be willing to pay? How does that work in certain levels? And so I think oftentimes annual planning could, you're thinking about where you want to go, and then you make it very internalized to what you're currently doing today. And I would probably encourage our folks to think about the risk and opportunity cost of not making those internal investments. And really, and when I say investments, it's change. I would really encourage all organizations, don't focus just on the investment, but focus where you want to go and have incremental milestones along the way, and use the tools, the processes to be able to make that measurement and to go. And then realize that one thing I love about planning, I do like about New Year's, all that stuff, is it's always a sense of birth. Like you can always rethink about it. You have a chance to think about your business or your organization, your team, and just always have a chance to do that, which is kind of simply how we started going and spending a couple of days, just steeping in all the wisdom and the energy and encouragement from a bunch of leaders that are doing it across all those different spectrums. Like I think make sure you take the time to think about that and where you want to go. It's a privilege to lead. I mean, we were joking about planning a bit, but it's a privilege actually to be in those roles and to have a chance to think about where you're going and what you're doing and the influence that you can have. And so I'm going to leave with be curious in all that you do, but be curious actually in the annually planning process too, and don't think of it simply as a rote chore that you have to get done, and really think about how you're going to use it, and then know what is the elements of the game, the models, whatever else that you have to do, but then really more importantly, think about how you're going to use it to impact your organizations.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the rebirth and looking forward to the new year, because a little bit later on we'll have some episodes about looking back at the year 2025 and then look ahead to 2026 and what that means. So excited to have that episode coming up. And this was great. Appreciate you guys, and always fun. And this has been another edition of Pure Signal. For myself, Ryan, for Kevin, for Jake, thanks for tuning in. Be curious, stay connected.
And be bold.
Bold.